Our guest speaker today, the Reverend Nate Walker, is a senior minister of our sister congregation, the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. He is also the co-editor of the book Whose God Rules, with a foreword by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Welcome, Reverend Nate. We're glad you're with us. And now let us enter into worship together. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our power to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy, to serve the spirit of freedom in the fullness of community. We begin with the words of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen Buddhist monk from Vietnam. It is titled Deep Listening and Loving Speech. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups, and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully, using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain, and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness. And the opening hymn is Filled with Loving Kindness, number 1031 in the Teal hymnal.
I would like the children or youth to come forward, and anyone who is feeling young at heart who would like a present to please come up. And you don't need to sit. You can actually stand. Come, just cuddle up over here. I've come to give you a gift, one that could help you in many different times in your life. And it is one that, if nurtured, can grow. So if you could please hold out your hand. There you go. Now make sure not to drop it. I'm passing out a seed, a very important seed. Not all people can see this seed, but those who do gain incredible insight.
I can't see my seed.
You can't see it? Look a little bit closer. You might even just feel that it's there, but not necessarily see it. That's kind of interesting about this seed. It's one that I think is inside every single person, but we forget. And so I'm hoping, okay, don't drop that. I'm hoping that you will be able to water this seed every single day. Now, bring the seed up to your ear. You might be able to hear it say something. It only says 3 words over and over again. What does it say?
I can't hear what it's saying.
Oh, here. Why don't you listen in here? It says, "Are you sure?"
Yes.
Can you hear it? Are you sure? That's what it keeps asking. Are you sure? This is called the seed of doubt. Why don't you listen? Are you sure? This seed is inside every single person. And if we water this seed, it begins to speak and grow. And so at different times in our life, we will come to certain conflicts. We will come to certain tensions with our friends or our family or at school. And all of a sudden, we hear, "Am I sure?" This seed, if we listen to it very carefully, does a few things. Whenever we have the impulse to be right and to be angry, to forge forward and to say, "You did that, you did this, look at that, where is my..." All of a sudden, we listen. Are you sure? And maybe, just maybe, we kind of stop to breathe and practice doubt. Doubt as an everyday spiritual practice. Now, if we are able to do this, we might just find ourselves relaxing our shoulders and breathing a little more. We might find ourselves being curious rather than furious. We might find ourselves, rather than try to blame others, the question, "Are you sure?" helps us seek understanding about what that other person is saying or doing. And understanding does not imply agreement. So my hope for you is that as you go on this day and all the days to come, that in those very special moments, you reach in And you swallow the seed of doubt, and you listen to it come all the way up and say, "Are you sure?" We are now going to send you off in peace as we sing, "Go Now in Peace." Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Let us prepare ourselves for meditation. If you could put your objects at your side and your feet on the ground, give your back some support. If you want to rub your hands and warm them up, or rub your shoulders, you're home. It is just us. And we come into this silence aware that the greatest gift we can give one another is our very presence. Breathing in, I am aware of my past. Breathing out, I am aware I am not my past. Breathing in, I hear the seed of doubt. Breathing out, I seek to practice understanding. Breathing in, I practice deep, deep listening. And breathing out, I practice loving, loving speech. Breathing out, I accept joy. Breathing in, I know I am an agent of joy. Breathing in, I am aware. You have a practice of singing Spirit of Life, is that correct? This is a beautiful song of an image of strong, strong roots from which we gain freedom, flight. And so, let us sing Spirit of Life. this next section of our service together, we will bring forward some readers. But I want to make clear that the word worship, in one of its original forms, means to etch worth, to scribe meaning. And that's what we are doing here. We are carving for ourselves some sense of self-worth. We are etching some kind of institutional self-worth for this remarkable fellowship. And as we cultivate that, we ourselves are able to scribe meaning, to make meaning of our lives through all of our transitions. These 4 readings come from the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. He is a Zen Buddhist monk from Vietnam. And he was kicked out of his country, and he found refuge in France and has been teaching around the world various mindfulness techniques. He describes them as trainings, mindfulness trainings. This is very different than dogma or rules. To train is to practice. Think of the Olympics. They spend years and years and years, a lifetime, training for that 3/100ths of a second. It is not about that 300ths of a second. It is about the lifetime of training. These 4 trainings serve as additional seeds that we ingest today, that I hope in days to come, years to come, you will water them again and return to those readings as a way to train, as a way to scribe your worth, your character. So if the 4 readers could come forward, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these readings, if you could take it quite slow and let us digest the words, feel free to repeat any phrases that ring true to you or that you are curious about. There's no rush. It's just us.
Reading 1. The first mindfulness training, openness. Aware of the suffering created by fanaticism and intolerance. We are determined not to be idealists about our bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology. Each Unitarian Universalist even Unitarian Universalist ones. We are committed to seeing the religious teachings as a guiding means that helps us learn to look deeply and develop understanding and compassion. To look deeply and develop understanding and compassion. They are not doctrines to fight, kill, or die for. They are not doctrines to fight, kill, or die for. We understand that fanaticism, in its many forms, is the result of perceiving things in a dualistic or discriminatory manner. We train ourselves to look at everything with openness and the insight of inner being in order to transform dogmatism and violence in ourselves and the world.
The second mindfulness training, non-attachment to views. Aware of the suffering created by attachment to views and wrong perceptions, we are determined to avoid being narrow-minded and bound to present views. We are committed to learning and practicing non-attachment from views and being open to others' insights and experiences in order to benefit from the collective wisdom. Insight is revealed through the practice of compassionate listening, deep looking, and letting go of notions rather than through the accumulation of intellectual knowledge. We are aware that the knowledge we presently possess is not changeless, absolute truth. Truth is found in life, and we will observe life within and around us in every moment, ready to learn throughout our lives.
The third mindfulness training is freedom of thought. Aware of the suffering brought about when we impose our view on others, we are determined not to force others, even our children, and that's for me, even our children, especially our children for me, by any means whatsoever, such as authority, threat, money, propaganda, or indoctrination to adopt our views. We are committed to respecting the rights of others to be different, to choose what to believe and how to decide. We are committed to respecting the rights of others to be different, to choose what to believe and how to decide. We will, however, learn to help others let go of and transform narrowness through loving speech and compassionate dialogue.
The fourth mindfulness training is awareness of suffering. Awareness of suffering. Aware that looking deeply at our own suffering can help us cultivate understanding and compassion. We are determined to come home to ourselves, to recognize, accept, embrace, and listen to our own suffering with the energy of mindfulness. We will do our best not to run away from our own suffering or cover it up through consumption, but practice conscious breathing. Conscious breathing and walking to look deeply into the roots of our suffering. We know we can only find the path leading to the transformation of suffering when we understand the roots of suffering. once we have understood our own suffering, we will be able to understand the suffering of others. We are committed to finding ways, including personal contact, using the telephone, electronic means, audiovisual means, and others, to be with those who suffer, so we can help them transform their suffering into compassion, peace, and joy.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Almost every Sunday, we take time during our service to share joys and sorrows, those events in our lives that move us most deeply. By doing that, we allow others to be part of our lives, and we deepen the community that holds us together. So we have been using the Book of Life to do that of late, so I'm going to go ahead and read from that. The floral arrangement is from Laura Weinstein in memory of her husband Cy, whose birthday was yesterday. Please keep in your thoughts Dave Stow, who's now home recuperating from a broken leg, and keep Colleen in your thoughts as well. Priscilla's mom, Jean, fell on Friday. She's at home in a wheelchair. She can't actually walk at this point or do much of anything by herself at the moment, even though she is home. We're waiting to get some results from further tests to see what the next step will be. Keep her in your thoughts and prayers, please. And as I lit the candle, this is to keep in mind all those thoughts, all those things that everyone's holding in their heart that have not been spoken or mentioned or written in the Book of Life, for that matter. Okay. With love and gratitude, we choose to give back to our local and broader community by sharing one half of our cash plate offering with a group that provides needed services to our community. During the month of May, our shared plate will go to, I'm not sure. Uh-oh. Say.
Yes, to help the people who were suffering due to the chemical spill in West Virginia.
Thank you. It was not here, and I read well, but I didn't see it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. You're Laura, is that correct? And these are in honor of your husband? I want to offer you the following story of a poet in honor of your husband. A poet once said that he could see a cloud in a piece of paper. And people thought he was crazy. Like, you can't see a cloud in a piece of paper, old man. It's just a paper. And he, bent as he was, said, "Are you sure?" He said, "The cloud releases the rain, and the rain falls to the soil and nurtures the seeds and the roots of the tree that we use to make paper." And then he, bent as he was, took the paper and said, "One day it will be consumed by the light. Its ashes will return to the soil, and its smoke to the cloud." The mindfulness bell rang as Thich Nhat Hanh entered the dimly lit meditation hall. There were 900 of us. We stood, we bowed. Thankfully, my position was one in which he walked quite close, and I felt very special. He made eye contact with me, or at least I thought he did. He walked intentionally before some beautiful orchids. They were seemingly just quite gentle and lovely, just like Thai. Thai is the name we used to call Thich Nhat Hanh. In Vietnamese, it means teacher. Just as we call him teacher, he calls all of us Buddhas to be. I stood smiling, considering it an honor to be in his presence. He placed his palms together and bowed to us, and we to him. The Sangha, the name used to describe the Buddhist community, gathered for 5 days of silent meditation in upstate New York. The autumn colors had illuminated the hillside. I am certain that none of us had read all 100 of the books he had published, but maybe between us all, we quite possibly did. Thich Nhat Hanh had become a prominent world leader after being exiled from his homeland in Vietnam. During the U.S.-Vietnam War, he engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience, which inspired Martin Luther King Jr. to nominate Thai for a Nobel Peace Prize. Thich Nhat Hanh's commitment to peace and to human rights became known as engaged Buddhism. Enlightenment was not found in retreating from the world, but being a part of it. As we returned to the lotus position, a young Buddhist nun stood. She sincerely bowed before the microphone and shared some very big ideas. She said, "We free ourselves from the inferiority complex. We free ourselves from the superiority complex. We free ourselves from the equality complex." I could understand at first the first two, but equality complex? What is that? I wrote those phrases in a journal that looks strikingly similar to your book of life. And as I was journaling, 24 nuns and monks intersperse with one another to sing a song. They chanted about non-dualism. In this song-like chant, they spoke of non-discrimination. It was inspired. The evening progressed with singing and stories and laughter. Ty retired to his study as we stayed for the orientation. This orientation watered some very painful seeds in me, because a young monk sat in lotus position on the platform. The platform was similar to that of this stage up here, quite high, and all of us sitting on the ground in this huge meditation hall. He instructed us to quietly enter the meditation hall at 5:45 a.m. That was painful enough. Then he said, all the women will sit here, and all the men will sit here. And I was curious and perplexed that Buddhists dedicated to non-dualism and non-discrimination were separating by gender. It seemed odd. We were then asked to practice noble silence while we mindfully loaded the bus for a 30-minute drive to our hotels. When I arrived, I was in the lobby, and a woman made eye contact with me. I don't remember how the conversation began, but I will never forget how it ended. I asked, is it custom for men and women to sit separate from one another in morning meditation? And she just burst into tears. The conversation was sparse and yet piercing. She said, why can't we just sit together? Why all the divisions? I fell into a kind of troubled, restless sleep. I felt itchy, but I was not scratching at my skin. My conscience was scratching at my imagination, replaying some of the mindfulness trainings. Protect the Sangha by taking a stand. Protect the Sangha by practicing understanding. Speak truthful and use loving speech. Practice compassionate listening and reconcile all conflicts, no matter how small. Dwell happily in the present moment and transform difficult emotions. Deal with anger by looking with the eyes of compassion. Commit to find ways, including personal contact, to be with those who suffer. Renounce narrowness by practicing deeply. Understand that knowledge is not changeless, absolute truth. Remain determined not to be bound by any practices, even Buddhist ones. Out of this early morning state of complexity, I emerged with serenity and clarity. The hotel notepad was just the right size for me to write Ty a letter. Saturday, October 3rd, 2009. Dear Ty, aware of the suffering caused by segregation, my intention is to practice this morning mindful integration by sitting with my sisters. I am determined to use my peaceful presence to cultivate equality for all, with loving respect, and in the name that you gave me, creative generosity of the heart. I woke at 4:45 a.m., boarded the bus, and watched the moonshine fall on changing leaves. Entering the meditation hall, a nun bowed to me. I handed her the note, which was addressed Ty. She smiled, bowed, and whispered, "I will give it to him." I bowed and rested my meditation cushion and blanket on the left side of the hall. My intention was not to only communicate to Ty, but to assure the women I was sitting with that my presence need not be a threat to their sense of safety. I gently distributed 7 copies of my note to the surrounding women, and then breathed into lotus position with my eyes closed. The sun rose, and chanting filled the hall. I was at peace. After the final bell, as we silently walked toward the breakfast tents, a hand rested on my shoulder. Bringing my shoulder to her, she gave me a hug. After having looked at my name tag and tapped it, her eyes were really bright. She bowed and said, "Thank you." I bowed and we smiled and continued in noble silence. After mindful eating and mindful walking and mindful working, the afternoon was open to mindful talking. It's like, imagine Unitarian Universalists not talking for 5 days. We gathered in clusters of about 20 or so people. These small groups were facilitated by the monastics, and there were different groups we could join. I joined the one that welcomed gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. I came to feel very close with them. I felt so comfortable that I decided to share my note with them. The reactions were just as interesting as the invitation to separate by gender. Some responded with gratitude. Others were very upset about gender segregation and expressed their anger. We talked about the heterosexual assumptions. We spoke of gender as a social construct, as an illusion. Others looked me in the eye, and this one man in particular, and said, "I'm concerned for your equality complex." That was awkward. Do I have an equality complex? And so I started to practice deep listening and ask myself, am I sure? We all left feeling quite enriched by one another's presence and one another's perspectives. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me until later, other Dharma groups were discussing the same subject. Apparently, the letter I had shared with the women I was sitting next to, they read aloud in their groups, and they were having this same conversation. Several people decided to write similar notes to Ty and make similar requests. Some expressed concern that their families were being separated and they wanted to be together. The next morning, as one person put it, the Dharma police were in full force. Dun 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 dun. One person described them as being quite aggressive about where people were going to be sitting. They were all women, and they were instructing people to sit accordingly. One woman in particular greeted and said that we were to sit by these segregated areas, and I bowed, and I handed my journal, where there was a copy of the letter subscribed, and she read it, and then snapped it shut. She walked away, which made me think that she was not going to interfere if I were to sit with my sisters that morning. I later shared this story with one of my colleagues who said, leave it to Nate to have to protest at a Buddhist retreat. Oh, gosh. Maybe I do have an equality complex. The Buddhists. Let's reform the Buddhists. Oh, the days seem to fall into one another, and silence touched a core part of my being. The walks were quite lovely. The people were kind, and the grounds were incredibly colorful. Breathing that mountain air was such a joy. On the last day, in the last hours of the retreat, just before our buses left for the train, we were invited for a question and answer period with Thich Nhat Hanh. I crafted and then recrafted an intentional question for Thai, and I really was interested in his response. The session began with the children. One boy came up to Thich Nhat Hanh and rubbed his head, who was bald, and said, Why do you shave your head every morning? And Thai replied, to save money on shampoo. Another child came forward and she said, can I have a hug? And he said, yes, of course. And they hugged. The body microphone kind of crunkled as you could hear her kind of breathing and giggling. The children were then invited to go and play, as the adults were invited to come forward to ask their questions. Coming before a Zen master is such a privilege. We were first invited to listen to the mindfulness bell, and then out of that silence discern when it was appropriate to speak. It reminded me of Quaker meeting houses. My bus was the first to leave, so I was given the opportunity to be the first to ask the question. I sat, and as you can picture, in this large platform. Thai was sitting on a chair, and I was sitting in a chair similar to how you are all sitting now. And down below on the floor were the 900 people. I said, Thai, my question is related to the request that you have for us, that women and men separate during morning meditation. I've contemplated this practice. I've listened to the suffering that it caused my friends. And I've made the decision to practice non-dualism and non-discrimination. I've come to read to you the following 2-sentence letter. And I read aloud the letter that I had written him days before. I said, as I reflect upon whether this practice was causing suffering or alleviating suffering, I couldn't help but think, maybe I have an equality complex. And the Sangha chuckled, and Thai nodded. I explained my understanding of the term equality complex. That it's a kind of belief in the illusion that we are separate from the beginning. This misperception that there is separation. And this idea that happiness will only occur if there is equality. When there is equality, then I will be happy. Is that the complex that he's referring to? I told him that I've been meditating on this term and I found it to be quite helpful when identifying how, in the name of openness, we become closed-minded. I myself have been victim to my own liberal fundamentalism. Yet, this term, equality complex, it can be used to dismiss even the most insightful forms of non-discrimination. I told him that I was interested in not watering the seeds passed on to me by my culture, by my religion, and cultivated in many cultures and in many world religions throughout human history. And that is the seed of gender superiority. I said, I know by sitting on separate sides during meditation that it may seem benign. But is it? Or is it a part of a long-standing historic system of which we are all a part? I know we are all equal, but my country's history teaches me that separation is not equal always. It can be a form of segregation. I said, Ty, it felt so good this weekend. It felt so good not to water the deeply rooted customs of gender superiority. It felt good to be thanked by women and men for practicing mindful integration. In this context, I've come to ask you and make this simple request. Sometime this next year, when lay and monastic practitioners gather during a morning meditation, will you invite us all to practice mindful integration? I handed him that invitation, and I signed Love, Nate, and I left my mailing address. I bowed. His response shocked me. It was utterly unexpected. He first reached out his hand. I offered the hand-scribed question, but with energy, he instead took the microphone. And I thought maybe he was trying to tell me I couldn't speak anymore. He then handed the microphone to a woman who was down on the ground, a nun, a young nun, instructing her to answer the question. And she shook her head and just shook there and with her spine erect and was quite troubled, shaking her head no. He then pointed the microphone at the eldest nun. This is his meditation partner of over 50 years, Sister Chang Kang. She's the delight. So, she was sitting in the front row. She then put her hands on the floor and literally crawled on all fours to the base of the the platform. This entire nonverbal exchange seemed to me to answer the question of what we were talking about. She finally came forward to the base of the platform, turned around, and while sitting, used the microphone to answer my question. Usually quite eloquent, Sister Chong Kong stumbled to describe Vietnamese culture. She told a story of how a teenage-old daughter had asked her why her father was no longer hugging her because she was growing breasts. She consoled the daughter, listened to her pain, and helped her understand the importance of separating from men. She described it as a natural part of human behavior. I remember looking at her awkwardly from above. She made eye contact with me and I smiled. It was beautiful and awkward. She went on to explain that this is not discrimination to separate by men and women in meditation. She said to me, "That is wrong thinking." I bowed to her. I don't remember exactly if she crawled or scooted her way back to her spot. The young nun then returned the handheld microphone to Tai, and he began to explain his perspective, that this practice was not segregation. He started by saying, "Ask any woman, and she will tell you that she likes to be with other women." He explained that at Plum Village in France, nuns live together and monks live together. They like to be together. It is not segregation. When there are more women than men in meditation, the women sit behind the men, he said. This meant that even though it is custom, a practice upheld by meditation hall ushers, it is not necessarily dogmatically applied in all situations. But he did describe the women as being behind the men in their section, which to me seems like a form of separation. Tai described the suffering that comes from an inferiority complex. He talked about the concerned women as having a wrong perception because that comes from a lack of self-esteem. He then talked about the superiority complex. He says it is a disease. It is a disease that comes from thinking that you are right and better than other people, and that your culture is better than others. He says to think that this is segregation, he said, looking at me, is a kind of disease derived from wrong perceptions. If you free yourself from those wrong perceptions, you will free yourself from suffering. He said there is a way out of this suffering. Look deeply into the nature of no self. He said in Buddhism, there is no self, there is no gender to separate. Know this, and you shall be free. He bowed. I bowed. I slowly walked to my cushion, trying to breathe naturally. One woman touched my shin and bowed to me. I returned in gratitude. And then I walked out of the hall and boarded the bus. The sting from having my thinking labeled as a disease lasted for about 23.100th of a second. It was kind of surprising because in the past it would have felt to me like I could have brooded over this for years and years in a kind of unhelpful way. I have long since mastered the practice of brooding. It's like I'm training for the big brooding Olympics, and I'm going to get that gold medal. And yet it was the practice of mindfulness that helped me. I began to see Thai as a kind of continuation. Buddhists explain that there is no birth, there is no death. There's not a birthday, but there is a continuation day. There is no end, there is no beginning. We are a continuation of our ancestors, and our words and our deeds continue past our time with our body. He says that a kind of continuation is like the poet who says that he could see a cloud in a piece of paper. And if we are to see that, we would be free. I began to see Thai himself as a continuation of his teachers. He is, after all, the 43rd patriarch of Zen Buddhism. I began to see this experience as a kind of intercultural encounter between a Vietnamese and an American. I began to see it as a intergenerational encounter between an 83-year-old and a 33-year-old. I began to see it as an interreligious encounter between a Zen master and a Unitarian Universalist minister. I began to see him as human. This was freeing. I stopped romanticizing him. Wow. When I realized I was romanticizing him to be this great teacher and so kind, and I started to dehumanize him by keeping him on that great platform. I'm so grateful to see his humanity. That was freeing. I also began to see myself as human. I am, after all, the 17th settled minister in the historic First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, established in 1796. There's been in that time only one female settled minister, and that was Reverend Holly Horn, who served as co-minister with her husband. We are not exempt from these systems. None of us. My ministry is a continuation of the same patriarchal system of which we are all a part. And in this way, there's no separation between me and Thai. We are both continuations of all those who came before, and our words and deeds serve as continuations of our collective future. My questions remain. How are we to imagine this legacy on which we build? What of this living tradition will we carry on for the next generation? What seeds will we plant in the minds of young girls, of young boys, in their beliefs about themselves in relationship to others? I hope to have the opportunity to one day have a cup of tea with Ty. I would like to discuss another question. I would like to ask him how the recognition of no self is spiritually achieved when the act of separating by gender physically brings more attention to that which makes us unique. My question is intended to help me go deeper into the practice, to practice mindfulness. And if I can begin to see his worldview as an indication of a certain time, place, then maybe we can also see, like the leaves that are changing, some kind of recoloring of the traditions. A kind of further continuation where equality is not seen as a complex, but a way of life. I'm deeply aware of this because in Unitarian Universalist congregations, we often instruct our youth to become religiously literate and learn about other religious traditions. And we do a thing called neighboring faiths. And what do we learn when we take them to the Sikh Gurdwara? We learn that there is gender separation in worship. What do we learn when we take them from Hindu temples? That there also is separation by gender in their worship services. Funny, the same thing happens in Mormonism, in some Jewish synagogues, and some Muslim mosques. And don't get me started about Catholicism. In Transylvania, Unitarians separate by gender in worship. It is not Buddhism alone. This is a global pattern. When I started to see this kind of continuation, I began to see that my circle of compassion was extended to many religions and many cultures. I began to understand that gender separation is a deep-rooted seed that teaches us to be justified about spiritual segregation, where certain classes of people are allowed certain accesses to religious leadership and otherwise. I experience the freedom that comes when transcending these complexes and seeking a new way of being. This experience taught me to make a vow. I vow not to practice domination, but to practice ways to coexist. I seek not to diminish anyone else's worth or my own, but to cultivate self-worth in myself and in others. I seek not to separate, but to mindfully integrate. These intentions are made possible because I keep hearing that voice. Are you sure? Are you sure? That question allowed me to hear the pain that this woman was experiencing. Her tears, which derive from feeling oppressed by systems of patriarchy, inspired me to practice mindfully and to imagine myself to be at one with all who suffer. My hope for you and for me on this day and all the continuing days to come is that may suffering in any form inspire us all to be at one. And that is why we breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, nor the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please reach across and take hands. Come. Go listen to the poets. Listen to them as they say that they can see a cloud in a piece of paper. And at first, you may just think they're crazy. But maybe there's something else behind their words, showing us a new way to look at the same things we've been seeing for generation after generation, aware that we are all a part of this vast and interdependent web of existence. Let us each take responsibility for being a part of that web and weave new ways in which we can scribe worth and make meaning, aware that we all matter, that we all belong. I wish you all a very peaceful week. And now for our postlude.
complicated as well.
Yeah, what's better for you, mornings or evenings?
Evenings.
Yeah, evenings. Yeah, it sometimes changes from week to week if I
Or
do
weekends,
coverage.
maybe.
But usually Tuesday nights are possible, or Thursday. Tuesdays and Thursdays are more flexible
Okay.
time-wise
What
because
about Saturdays?
that's
Depends.
tough because the problem with weekends is quite honestly, I try not to work on weekends because it's hard for us to orchestrate time together as it is. Because
I know.
Because Mondays and
great
Fridays I
group,
work
great
in office and
Right.
I drive from there to New Jersey to do karate at night on Mondays. I'm in two different offices on Fridays. I'm in Abington and then in another office till 8 o'clock at night. So it's like I'm Friday.
Oh, I should tell you too that my massage therapist, it works with Bobby, but it's Jackie Miller.